Hi, I'm Dr. Leo Stouter, and this is Anatomy on the Beach. So let's talk about the cranial nerves. First of all, let's look at the cranial nerves. Let's talk about the cranial nerves. First of all, when we think of the cranial nerves, we have to make sure that we know that they're part of the peripheral nervous system. They're not part of the central nervous system, even though they do have the name cranial. So let's look at our first cranial nerve, which is going to be number 1. We have one nose, so we expect cranial nerve number 1 to be number 1 as well. We call this the olfactory. We also have cranial nerve number 2. Cranial nerve number 2 is for our 2 eyes, so that's going to be our optic. That allows us to see. But what allows us to move our eyes? That's a different story. We have the eyeball, which is going to be moved by the 3rd cranial nerve. That 3rd cranial nerve is going to be the ocular motor. It's going to move our eye in every way except for abduction. We put a nose here, and so for our eye to go into abduction or to go out, we need to use another cranial nerve called the abducens. It makes sense, doesn't it? It's going to be abducting our eye. But when we abduct our right eye, look what happens to our left eye. It goes medial. That is not the abducens, because that's not abducting, but that will be our 3rd cranial nerve. In addition, our eye can also go inferior, and also it can go lateral, or down and out. So it can go down and out. So as we're looking down and out, we're using a different cranial nerve, number 4. And this cranial nerve is called the trochlea. So the trochlear nerve will allow our eye to go down and out, as if we made a 4. We go back here, and we see that we have cranial nerve 5. And cranial nerve 5 is going to be responsible for our face. So cranial nerve 5 will be a major facial nerve. It's also going to be a motor nerve as well. Cranial nerve 5 is called the trigeminal. Now cranial nerve 6 we already talked about. This is cranial nerve 5. We already talked about cranial nerve 4. Now let's move on to cranial nerve 7. Cranial nerve 7, as you remember, is called the facial. The facial is going to be moving our face, and that's going to be its major purpose, as well as it's going to have a sensory for taste. Our 8th cranial nerve is going to be for our ears. So we're going to be looking at the vestibulocochlear. Vestibulo for our balance, and cochlear for our hearing. We also have cranial nerve number 9. Cranial nerve number 9 is going to be our glossopharyngeal. Our glossopharyngeal is going to be responsible for using our tongue, and also for our pharynx as well. That's So let's look at cranial nerve 10, which is the vagus. Cranial nerve 10 is going to be a nerve that's going to be going throughout the whole body. It's going to be going through a variety of areas of the body, to our gastrointestinal tract, to our heart, all over the place. And because it's called the vagus, which means wanderer, it indeed is going to be wandering all the way through our bodies. Very important nerve, the cranial nerve 10, which is also called the vagus. In addition, we have cranial nerve 11, which is going to raise and lower our shoulders, and this is going to be called the accessory. So the accessory, in the old days we used to call it the spinal accessory. Now we just call it the accessory nerve. That's going to be cranial nerve 11. Finally then, we have cranial nerve 12, which is going to be underneath the tongue. And this is going to be called the hypoglossal. The hypoglossal will allow for tongue movement.